My parents let my sister disable every smoke alarm because noise was violence, then tried to stay neutral after she had me arrested for saving them. When I asked my mom why she still believed Zoe after the fire, she looked at me and said, "You did hate the whispering. Maybe this was your way out." I just stared at her. That was 7 weeks ago. This morning, she was standing outside my apartment holding Zoe's medical records and crying. My sister required everyone to whisper in her presence because she claimed normal volume voices physically hurt her, so my entire family lived in constant whispers, unable to speak normally in our own home for fear of causing her pain. It almost ended all our lives. My sister Zoe had always been sensitive to sound. As kids, she'd cover her ears during thunderstorms and cry at birthday parties when people sang. But when she turned 15, she read about auditory processing sensitivity online and decided she had a severe case. She started wearing noise-canceling headphones everywhere and flinching dramatically at normal conversation. Our parents took her to specialists who found nothing wrong, but Zoe insisted doctors didn't understand her condition. She began training us to modulate our voices around her, claiming our aggressive volume was destroying her nervous system. We thought it was just Zoe being dramatic until she started enforcing consequences. The rules came with a laminated volume chart. Level 1 was therapeutic whisper, was the only acceptable volume for all communication near Zoe. Anything above that was assault volume. She'd hold a decibel meter during conversations, documenting violations. If we spoke normally, she'd collapse to the floor, screaming that we were torturing her with sound. "You're killing me!" she'd wail if someone forgot to whisper. Our parents made us attend family voice therapy, where we practiced whispering for hours. The therapist, who Zoe had found online, taught us that vocal violence was real, and we needed to protect Zoe from our naturally aggressive voices. We signed contracts promising to whisper in her presence. She posted signs throughout the house. "Whisper zone, normal voices are violence." Even clearing your throat too loudly would send her into hysterics about our cruelty. Living in whispers warped everything natural about family life. Dad would whisper at the TV during football games, his excitement reduced to breathy touchdowns, while the crowd roared from the speakers. Mom won $5,000 on a scratch-off and whispered, "We won," like she was sharing a death announcement. My boyfriend broke up with me through text because he couldn't handle whispering every conversation at our house. He said it felt like shame, not intimacy. Every time I had some space from Zoe, I'd beg my parents to take a stand against her rules, but they said the most important thing was keeping the peace. They told me living with Zoe was good practice for dealing with difficult people later in my life. "I don't even notice the whispering anymore," Mom said. "You'll get used to it too," but I never did. How do you get used to whispering happy birthday, like a funeral hymn, while your sister monitors you with a meter? Or when my grandma whispered and forgot the rules, her normal-voiced "hello, sweetie" sent Zoe to the emergency room in an ambulance. She convinced the paramedics to turn off their sirens and communicate in whispers. School became my only escape where I could speak normally, but Zoe got the administration to create a quiet zone around her. Students had to whisper in hallways when she passed. Teachers restructured classes, using written instructions instead of verbal ones. She carried cards explaining her condition and made anyone who might speak near her sign liability waivers. The whole thing was ridiculous, but it wasn't dangerous, until the night I smelled smoke at 2 a.m. Zoe had left a candle going in the living room, and now the curtains were up in flames. I needed to wake everyone immediately, but years of conditioning had trained me to whisper even in crisis. I stood in the hallway, smoke beginning to fill the air, and whispered, "Fire, there's a fire." I went to my parents' room, whispering urgently at their door. Nothing. I pushed inside and whispered directly in Mom's ear. She mumbled and rolled over. The smoke was getting thicker. I shook Dad, whispering, "Fire, wake up." He couldn't hear me over the white noise machine Zoe required in every room. My throat burned from smoke and whispering. I ran to Zoe's room, knowing that any volume above a whisper would cause chaos, but having no choice. The smoke alarm hadn't gone off because Zoe had made us disable them. The sound was violence. I stood at her door, paralyzed between years of training and the immediate need to save my family. Finally, I screamed, "Fire!" at full volume. Zoe erupted from her room, not fleeing but attacking me for the assault, while smoke poured through the hallway. I shoved past her and ran to my parents, screaming for them to wake up while Zoe fell to the floor in convulsions, despite the fire around her. We lost half the house, and the firemen said if we'd stayed in for 2 more minutes, we would have all lost our lives. Instead of being grateful, Zoe filed assault charges against me. She told the fire marshal I'd started the fire myself as an excuse to scream at her. "She's been looking for a way to assault me with her voice for years," Zoe said, so she lit the fire and waited until it spread to have her excuse. The marshal found the disabled smoke alarms suspicious, even though I told them it was Zoe who'd turned them off. Zoe produced her recordings of every whisper violation I'd committed over the years, painting a picture of someone who hated the restrictions. She knew fire was the only excuse that might justify violence, Zoe explained, so she created one. My parents sat silent as the marshal questioned them. My mother looked like she might believe Zoe's horrible story. "She tried to kill us all just so she could scream," Zoe said, and Mom hesitated. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but no sound came out. Years of whispering had finally stolen my voice completely. The next thing I knew, I was in handcuffs and arrested for arson. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and disinfectant. I sat in the interrogation room, my throat raw from smoke and years of whispering, unable to make any sound at all. The detective across from me tapped his pen against the metal table, waiting for answers I couldn't give. He slid a notepad across to me. I wrote frantically, explaining about Zoe's condition, the whisper rules, the disabled smoke alarms. My hand cramped as I tried to capture years of manipulation in a few desperate paragraphs. The detective read my notes with raised eyebrows, occasionally glancing up at me like I was the one with mental problems. After 3 hours of written interrogation, they released me on my own recognizance. The charges weren't dropped, just pending further investigation. My parents waited in the lobby, Mom clutching Dad's arm. Neither of them looked at me as we walked to the car. The drive home was silent, but not the enforced whisper silence I'd grown used to. This was the heavy quiet of accusation and doubt. We pulled up to our half-burnt house. Yellow tape still stretched across the damaged section. Zoe's car sat in the driveway. Inside, She'd already rearranged the undamaged living room. New whisper zone signs covered every wall, larger than before. A stack of papers sat on the coffee table, printouts from online forums about acoustic assault survivors and voice violence PTSD. She'd been busy building her case. Zoe emerged from the kitchen wearing her noise-canceling headphones, carrying her decibel meter like a weapon. She pointed it at me, then at my parents, monitoring even our breathing. Mom immediately dropped her voice to a whisper. Dad cleared his throat softly, carefully. I grabbed a notepad from the counter and wrote, "She left the candle burning. She disabled the alarms. She's lying." Zoe read over my shoulder and laughed, a harsh sound that seemed to contradict her supposed sensitivity. She whispered to our parents about trauma responses and how criminals often project their crimes onto victims. She'd found a new therapist, she said, one who specialized in acoustic assault recovery. That night, I lay in my smoke-damaged room, trying to force sound from my throat. Nothing came, not even a whisper. The irony wasn't lost on me. Zoe had wanted us all silent, and now I truly was. Through the thin walls, I heard her on the phone, her voice suspiciously normal as she talked to someone about documenting everything and building an airtight case. The next morning, I woke to find my laptop missing. My phone, too. Zoe stood in my doorway with Mom, explaining in theatrical whispers how the fire marshal needed to examine all our electronics for evidence. She'd helpfully gathered them for the investigation. Mom nodded along, still under Zoe's spell. I spent the day at the library, using their computers to research. I found Zoe's online activity wasn't hard to trace. She'd been posting in forums for months about her abusive sister who refused to respect her medical needs. The dates lined up perfectly. Every post came after I'd challenged the whisper rules or begged our parents for normalcy. One post from 3 weeks ago chilled me. Sometimes I think something dramatic needs to happen for people to understand how serious acoustic violence is. Maybe if there were real consequences. I printed everything, my hands shaking. The librarian glanced at me with concern as I gathered the pages. I wanted to explain, to scream the truth, but my voice remained trapped in my damaged throat. Back home, I found Zoe had installed new locks on her door and my parents' door. For safety, she explained to Dad, while the investigation was ongoing. She'd given them the only keys. I was effectively locked out of 2/3 of my own home. That evening, our neighbor Mrs. Quinn stopped by with a casserole. She'd always been kind, bringing cookies during holidays and checking on us after storms. Zoe intercepted her at the door, whispering about the trauma of the fire and how I'd snapped under the pressure of her medical needs. Mrs. Quinn glanced past Zoe to where I stood in the hallway. Something feels off about how quickly Zoe bounced back from those supposed convulsions during the fire to immediately start building her case against her sister. I'm curious why the parents aren't questioning how their daughter managed to disable smoke alarms, install new locks, and gather evidence while supposedly suffering from such severe sound sensitivity that even breathing needs monitoring. I held up my notepad, desperate to communicate, but Zoe gently closed the door, explaining that I was having episodes and it wasn't safe for visitors. I retreated to my room and found more of my belongings missing. My journal, years of photographs, even my high school yearbook. Zoe was systematically erasing evidence of who I was before her narrative took hold. On my pillow lay a new document, a family safety contract requiring me to stay 10 feet away from all family members at all times for their protection. The house felt like a prison. I couldn't speak, couldn't access my parents, couldn't prove my innocence. Every attempt to communicate was filtered through Zoe's interpretation. She'd whisper to Mom about my aggressive body language or tell Dad my written notes were manipulative tactics. On the third day, I discovered Zoe's ultimate plan. While she was in her room, I snuck into the kitchen and found her day planner. She'd scheduled appointments with 3 different lawyers, all specializing in victim advocacy. Notes in the margins detailed her strategy: criminal charges for the fire, civil suit for years of acoustic assault, and a restraining order to remove me from the house permanently. She'd win. Without my voice, without evidence, without even my parents' trust, I had no defense against her carefully constructed narrative. The girl who'd made us all whisper was about to silence me forever. That night, I made a decision. If I couldn't speak the truth, I'd have to find another way to expose it. I started with the one thing Zoe couldn't control: the physical evidence from the fire itself. The fire marshal's report would show where the fire started, and candle wax didn't lie. I snuck out after midnight and walked to the fire station. The night dispatcher looked surprised when I handed him my written request to speak with the fire marshal. He made a call, and surprisingly, Marshal Stewart agreed to meet with me the next morning, despite the late hour of my request. But when I returned home, Zoe was waiting on the porch, her decibel meter trained on my footsteps. She'd installed motion sensors while I was gone. As I approached, she began documenting my threatening approach on her phone, whispering narration about feeling unsafe. The game had shifted. She knew I was fighting back. I froze on the walkway, watching Zoe's theatrical performance unfold. She clutched her chest and stumbled backward, her whispered narration growing more dramatic with each step. The motion sensor lights blazed around us, creating harsh shadows that made her movements look even more exaggerated. I held up my hands in a peaceful gesture, but she flinched as if I'd thrown something at her. Mom appeared at the door, wrapping her robe tighter against the night air. Her eyes darted between us, taking in Zoe's cowering posture and my frozen stance 20 feet away. I pointed to my throat, then made writing motions with my hand. Mom's face hardened. She beckoned Zoe inside, whispering something I couldn't hear. They both disappeared into the house, leaving me standing alone in the driveway. I waited 10 minutes before approaching the door. It was locked. My key didn't work. They'd changed the locks while I was gone. I knocked softly, then harder. No response. Through the window, I saw them huddled together on the couch, Zoe showing Mom something on her phone. Probably the video she'd just recorded of my threatening return. With nowhere else to go, I spent the night in my car. The seats didn't recline properly, and the smell of smoke from my clothes filled the small space. I wrapped myself in an old gym towel from the trunk and tried to sleep, but my mind raced with plans and counterplans. Tomorrow's meeting with Marshal Stewart felt like my only hope. Dawn came slowly. I watched the house through my rearview mirror, waiting for signs of movement. At 7, Dad's car pulled out of the garage. He didn't look in my direction. An hour later, Mom left too. Only Zoe remained, probably documenting my presence in the driveway as further evidence evidence of stalking. The fire station sat 3 blocks away. I arrived early, sitting on the bench outside until Marshal Stewart pulled up in his truck. He recognized me immediately, his weathered face creasing with concern. Inside his office, I wrote my questions on a legal pad while he pulled up the investigation files. He showed me the preliminary report. The fire's origin was confirmed as the living room, specifically the area near the window where Zoe always kept her meditation candles. Wax residue patterns indicated a candle had been burning for hours before tipping over. The disabled smoke detectors were noted as a contributing factor to the delayed response. I wrote frantically, asking if this evidence cleared me. Rodriguez hesitated, then explained that while the physical evidence didn't support arson, it also didn't definitively prove who left the candle burning. Zoe had already provided a statement claiming I often lit her meditation candles to mock her sensory needs. Without witnesses or my voice to counter her claims, it became my word against hers. I pulled out the printed forum posts from the library, sliding them across his desk. Rodriguez read through them, his frown deepening. He made copies, promising to add them to the investigation file, but he warned me that online posts, while concerning, weren't proof of criminal intent. The investigation would continue, but he couldn't guarantee the outcome. Leaving the fire station, I felt the weight of Zoe's strategy. She'd spent years building her victim narrative, and I had days to dismantle it. Every piece of evidence I found could be twisted to support her story. Every action I took could be reframed as aggression. She'd turned our entire family history into a weapon against me. I returned to find my car surrounded by yellow caution tape. A note on the windshield, written in Zoe's handwriting, claimed the vehicle was parked illegally on private property. Security cameras, newly installed, monitored every angle. I carefully removed the tape and drove to a nearby parking lot, adding car trouble to my growing list of problems. The library became my temporary headquarters. I researched voice loss, learning about psychological aphonia, when trauma or stress causes the vocal cords to stop functioning. The librarian, a kind woman named Cassandra, noticed my daily visits and started leaving helpful books at my usual table. She never asked questions, just offered gentle smiles and occasional cups of water. Through online searches, I discovered Zoe's digital footprint extended far beyond support forums. She'd created multiple social media accounts dedicated to her condition, gathering thousands of followers who viewed her as an inspiration. Videos of our family whispering during holidays had gone viral in certain communities. She'd monetized our dysfunction, selling meditation guides and noise sensitivity workshops. One video stopped me cold. Posted just a week before the fire, it showed Zoe demonstrating her therapeutic candle ritual. In the background, barely visible, was the same candle that started the fire. She talked about leaving it burning through the night for continuous healing energy. The timestamp showed she'd filmed it in our living room, right where the fire began. I downloaded everything, saving copies to multiple USB drives, but I needed more than digital evidence. I needed someone who could speak for me, literally. That's when I remembered Dr. Theodora Reeves, the first specialist my parents had taken Zoe to see. She'd found nothing wrong with Zoe's hearing and had recommended psychiatric evaluation instead. Zoe had convinced my parents that Dr. Reeves was unqualified to understand rare conditions. Dr. Reeves' office was across town. I took 3 buses to get there, clutching my notepad and evidence folder. Her receptionist looked puzzled when I handed over my written request, but Dr. Reeves agreed to see me between appointments. She remembered our family immediately. In her office, I wrote out the whole story while she read Zoe's forum posts and watched the candle ritual video. Her expression grew increasingly troubled. She pulled out Zoe's old file, showing me her original assessment. Not only had Zoe's hearing tested as perfect, but she'd also shown signs of what Dr. Reeves called selective sound sensitivity, responding dramatically only when others were watching. Dr. Reeves couldn't diagnose someone she hadn't seen recently, but she offered to write a letter documenting her original findings. She also suggested I see a colleague who specialized in trauma-induced voice loss. The appointment would be expensive, but I had a small savings account Zoe didn't know about. I scheduled it for the next day. Returning to the parking lot where I'd left my car, I found the windows smashed. Glass covered the seats. Nothing was stolen. This was a message. Security footage from nearby stores would mysteriously be unavailable, I was certain. I spent an hour vacuuming glass with the gas station's coin-operated vacuum, my hands shaking with frustration. That night, I parked behind a 24-hour grocery store and tried to sleep. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with emails. Zoe had found my cloud storage and was systematically reporting every saved file as stolen personal information. The platforms were automatically removing my evidence while they investigated. I watched years of photos, documents, and memories disappear one by one. By morning, my email account was suspended for harassment. My social media profiles were flagged and frozen. Zoe had weaponized the very systems designed to protect victims, turning them against me. Without a voice to call customer service or verify my identity, I was helpless to stop the digital erasure. The voice specialist, Dr. Marcus Webb, ran multiple tests on my throat. Physically, everything appeared normal. Zoe installed motion sensors and security cameras faster than a tech startup preparing for a product launch. Guess she's really committed to her home surveillance aesthetic. He explained that psychological aphonia often occurred after prolonged vocal stress combined with emotional trauma. Years of forced whispering had trained my body to suppress normal speech. The fire, the arrest, and Zoe's escalating attacks had triggered a complete shutdown. He started me on exercises, teaching me to hum and gradually work towards sounds. Progress would be slow, he warned, especially under continued stress. I needed a safe, supportive environment to heal, exactly what I didn't have. He documented my condition carefully, providing medical evidence that my voice loss was real and trauma-induced. Leaving his office with a slight hum in my throat, the first sound I'd made in days, I felt a spark of hope. But in the parking lot, 2 police officers waited by my damaged car. Zoe had reported it as abandoned and potentially connected to criminal activity. I showed them my license and registration, writing explanations on my notepad. They seemed sympathetic but had to follow protocol. They'd need to verify my identity and the car's status. While they made calls, I noticed Zoe watching from across the street. She sat in her car with her phone raised, recording the entire interaction. She'd orchestrated this, knowing that any police contact would look bad for my pending arson investigation. Every move I made played into her narrative of an unstable, dangerous person. The officers eventually cleared me to leave, but warned me to fix the windows immediately. Driving with broken windows was a violation. I nodded, adding auto repair to my impossible list of expenses. My savings were draining fast between the hotel parking, medical appointments, and now car repairs. I found a cheap auto glass repair shop that could fix the windows that afternoon. While waiting, I sat in their lobby and practiced Dr. Webb's exercises. Soft humming sounds emerged from my throat, barely audible but present. An elderly man waiting for his oil change smiled encouragingly. Human kindness from strangers had become precious. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. A photo appeared, my childhood diary, open to a page where I'd written about hating Zoe's birthday party when I was 8. She'd been too loud, I'd complained, wishing she would be quiet. Below the photo, a message. Evidence of long-term hostility towards sound sensitivity. Thanks for keeping such detailed records. She had everything. Every moment of sibling frustration, every normal childhood complaint was being recontextualized as proof of my violence. I realized she must have been collecting evidence for years, long before the fire. This wasn't reactive. It was a carefully planned campaign. The auto shop finished my windows as the sun set. Driving through town, I noticed flyers on telephone poles. My face stared back from missing person posters, but the text told a different story. Have you seen this woman? Dangerous individual with history of violence. Do not approach. Call police immediately. Zoe's contact information was listed at the bottom. I pulled over and tore down as many as I could reach, stuffing them into a garbage bag. But there were hundreds, maybe thousands. She'd turned the entire town into her surveillance network. Every concerned citizen who saw those flyers would become her unwitting ally. At a red light, the car next to me honked. The driver pointed at me, then at a flyer on the nearby pole. I saw him reaching for his phone. I drove away quickly, my heart pounding. The safe spaces in my own town were shrinking by the hour. I needed allies, but everyone I knew was connected to my family. Former coworkers, old friends, distant relatives. They'd all heard Zoe's version first. Her social media campaign had reached them before I could. Several had already blocked my number after receiving messages about my dangerous behavior. The grocery store parking lot no longer felt safe. Too many people, too many cameras, too many flyers. I drove to an abandoned rest stop outside town, parking behind a defunct information booth. The isolation felt safer than civilization. I practiced my voice exercises in the dark, managing a raspy whisper that sounded like a ghost of my former self. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by every passing car. I dreamed of screaming, of my voice returning with hurricane force, blowing away Zoe's lies like paper walls. But morning brought only the same painful rasp and the taste of fear. Checking my phone, I found my bank account frozen. The screen showed a fraud alert. Someone had reported suspicious activity. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Without access to my remaining savings, I couldn't buy food, gas, or continue fighting. Zoe had found another pressure point. The bank branch opened at 9. I arrived early, practicing what I'd write to explain my situation. Inside, the teller's expression changed when she pulled up my account. She excused herself, returning with the manager. They'd received multiple reports of identity theft connected to my account. The freeze would remain until the investigation concluded. I wrote frantically, trying to explain, but their professional sympathy felt hollow. They provided forms to dispute the freeze, warning it could take weeks to resolve. Weeks I didn't have. My gas tank was nearly empty, my stomach cramping from hunger. Zoe had turned bureaucracy itself into a weapon. Outside the bank, Mrs. Quinn appeared. Our former neighbor looked older, worn down by recent events. She approached cautiously, glancing around as if Zoe might materialize. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. The habit had infected her too. She pressed something into my hand, $200 in cash and a granola bar. Before I could write my thanks, she hurried away. But her kindness cracked something inside me. Tears came for the first time since the fire. Silent sobs that shook my whole body. One person still believed in my innocence. The money bought me gas and cheap food from a dollar store. I sat in my car eating cold soup from a can, planning my next move. The evidence I'd gathered was strong, but reaching anyone who could help seemed impossible. Zoe had built walls around every avenue of justice. Then I remembered something. The therapist who'd run our mandatory family voice therapy sessions. The one Zoe had found online. If she was legitimate, she'd have records. If she wasn't, that was evidence too. Her name was Dr. Sarah Winters, and her office was 2 towns over. The drive took most of my gas, but I had to try. The address led to a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax service. No medical building, no professional complex. Inside, the office was a single room with folding chairs and motivational posters. Dr. Winters turned out to be a life coach with an online certification in alternative family dynamics. She remembered our family immediately, launching into a whispered explanation of her therapeutic approach. I wrote questions about her qualifications, her relationship with Zoe, and whether she'd ever treated actual auditory conditions. Her answers revealed the truth. Zoe had found her through a forum for misunderstood conditions and paid her directly to support the diagnosis. I convinced her to write a statement admitting she wasn't a licensed therapist and that Zoe had specifically sought someone who would validate her self-diagnosis. The woman seemed relieved to confess, mentioning she'd felt increasingly uncomfortable with the arrangement. She'd seen families destroyed by less elaborate deceptions. Driving back with the statement, I felt momentum building. Each piece of evidence weakened Zoe's narrative. But as I entered town, police lights filled my rearview mirror. I pulled over, hands visible on the steering wheel. The officer approached carefully, hand on his weapon. He'd received reports of a dangerous individual matching my description driving erratically. I hadn't been speeding or swerving, but that didn't matter. Zoe's network had spotted me. The officer asked for my license and registration, then returned to his car for an agonizingly long check. When he came back, his demeanor had changed. The system showed multiple concerns connected to my name: the arson investigation, the bank fraud alert, the missing person reports. He asked me to step out of the vehicle. I complied, moving slowly, keeping my hands visible. He performed a field sobriety test, which I passed. He searched my car, finding nothing but empty soup cans and crumpled flyers. But procedure required him to verify my current address and contact information. When I couldn't verbally confirm anything, he grew suspicious. My written explanation explanations seemed to make things worse. Another officer arrived as backup. They discussed whether to take me in for a psychological evaluation. The missing person flyers had mentioned mental instability. My voice loss and written communication fit the profile Zoe had created. I stood by my car, watching my freedom hang by a thread. Finally, they decided to let me go with a warning, but they'd file a report, adding another official document to Zoe's arsenal. As they drove away, I realized she didn't need to have me arrested again. She just needed enough documented encounters to paint a pattern of instability. Night was falling again. The rest stop felt too exposed now. The parking lots too monitored. I drove to the edge of town where old industrial buildings stood empty. Behind a closed factory, I found a spot hidden from the road. The isolation felt complete. I spent hours practicing my voice exercises, pushing through the pain. Whispers turned to hoarse words. No, stop, lies. Each word felt like a victory. Dr. Webb had said emotional breakthrough often preceded vocal recovery. My anger was becoming my strength. Morning brought new challenges. My phone battery was dying, and charging it meant risking exposure in public spaces. I needed to act before losing this last connection to evidence and allies. Zoe's been planning this for years. The childhood diary, the fake therapist she hired in advance, the way she immediately had those flyers ready. This wasn't some reaction to the fire at all. I drove to the library, hoping Cassandra would let me use an outlet despite my current status as town pariah. The library felt different. Patrons moved away when I entered. Someone had posted flyers inside, despite policy against solicitation. Cassandra met my eyes sadly. She'd been ordered to ask me to leave if I caused any disturbance. I wrote a quick note asking only for 5 minutes to charge my phone. She glanced around, then quietly pointed to an outlet behind the reference desk. I sat on the floor, hidden from view, while my phone slowly charged. Through the shelves, I heard whispers, not Zoe's enforced kind, but genuine gossip about the dangerous woman hiding in their library. My phone lit up with missed calls from an unknown number. The voicemail was from Dr. Reeves. She'd been contacted by investigators about my case and wanted to help. She'd found additional documentation from Zoe's teenage years that might prove relevant, but she needed to speak with me directly. I texted back, explaining my voice situation and suggesting email. Her response was quick. She'd already tried email, but my accounts were all blocked or suspended. She proposed meeting in person that afternoon at a coffee shop between our towns, neutral ground. The drive there used most of my remaining gas. I arrived early, watching through the window as Dr. Reeves entered and chose a corner table. She looked nervous but determined. I joined her, sliding my notepad across the table. She'd brought Zoe's complete file, including session notes she'd kept despite Zoe's parents requesting their destruction. The notes detailed Zoe's admission that she could control her reactions, choosing when to appear sensitive based on who was watching. She'd even bragged about fooling her parents. More importantly, Dr. Reeves had contacted colleagues who'd seen similar cases. She'd compiled research on induced illness behavior, when someone creates or exaggerates symptoms for psychological gain. The parallels to Zoe's behavior were undeniable. This wasn't just evidence, it was a professional framework for understanding her manipulation. We spent an hour organizing the documentation. Dr. Reeves offered to speak with Marshall Stewart directly, providing expert testimony about Zoe's history. She also knew a lawyer who specialized in false accusation cases, someone who might take my case despite my current financial situation. Leaving the coffee shop, I felt hope returning. But in the parking lot, Zoe waited by my car. She stood perfectly still, her phone raised, recording everything. I stopped walking, maintaining distance. She didn't speak or move, just recorded. The implied threat was clear. Approach your car, and I'll have evidence of you confronting me. I retreated to the coffee shop, watching through the window. Zoe waited another hour before finally leaving. When I returned to my car, I found new scratches along the side and a note under the windshield. Stop harassing me or next time I'll defend myself. Written in her handwriting, designed to look like she'd left it after I'd confronted her. The game was escalating. Every move I made to defend myself became evidence of aggression in her narrative, but I couldn't stop now. Dr. Reeves' evidence was too important. I drove to Marshall Stewart's office, praying he'd still listen. His expression when I entered was unreadable. He'd received multiple reports about my erratic behavior around town, but he also remembered our earlier conversation and the evidence I'd shared. He agreed to review Dr. Reeves' documentation, though he warned that psychological profiles weren't typically admissible in arson investigations. I wrote furiously, explaining how the profile established pattern and motive. Zoe hadn't just left a candle burning. She'd orchestrated events to frame me. The fire gave her the ultimate victim status while eliminating her primary challenger. Rodriguez nodded slowly, pieces clicking together. He made copies of everything, then shared his own update. The investigation had uncovered something interesting. The candle that started the fire was a specific brand sold by only one local store. Security footage from that store showed Zoe purchasing dozens of identical candles over several months. Why would someone with severe sound sensitivity repeatedly visit a busy retail store? More importantly, she'd paid cash every time, despite usually using credit cards. The pattern suggested premeditation. Rodriguez couldn't make accusations yet, but the investigation was shifting. He advised me to stay visible but avoid any contact with Zoe or my family while he pursued these leads. I left feeling vindicated but exhausted. My gas gauge read empty. I coasted into a station on fumes, using my last $40 to fill half the tank. The attendant recognized me from the flyers, watching suspiciously as I pumped gas. The whole town had become hostile territory. That night, parked behind the abandoned factory, I practiced speaking with new determination. Words came easier now, rough and painful, but audible. My name is... I croaked to the empty darkness. My sister is lying. Each sentence felt like reclaiming stolen ground. My phone buzzed with a message from the lawyer Dr. Reeves had mentioned. Theodore Blackwood specialized in defamation and false accusation cases. He'd reviewed my situation and wanted to meet. His office was 3 towns away, but he'd waived the consultation fee given the circumstances. The next morning, I dressed in my least smoke-damaged clothes and drove to his office. Theodore was younger than I'd expected, with kind eyes and a patient manner. He listened as I whispered my story, occasionally asking for clarification. My voice lasted 20 minutes before fading back to silence. He'd seen similar cases, family members weaponizing systems designed to protect real victims. The key was was documenting the pattern of manipulation while avoiding any actions that could be twisted against me. He offered to take my case on contingency, believing we had strong grounds for both criminal defense and civil action. But he warned me, Zoe would escalate when she learned I had legal representation. Manipulators often became most dangerous when their control slipped. I needed to be prepared for her final moves. He suggested finding somewhere safe to stay, away from places she'd expect me to be. I thought of the abandoned factory, my car, the rest stops. None were truly safe, but I had nowhere else to go. Theodore gave me his direct number, instructing me to document everything and avoid being alone in isolated places. The irony wasn't lost on me. Isolation was all I had left. Returning to town, I noticed unusual activity. Police cars clustered near the library. An ambulance pulled away as I passed. My phone rang. Theodore's number. His voice was urgent. Zoe had escalated dramatically. She'd staged a collapse at the library, claiming I'd been stalking her there. Witnesses saw her fall, convulsing after supposedly seeing me through the window. The problem? I'd been in Theodore's office an hour away, with time-stamped security footage proving my alibi. Zoe had miscalculated, not knowing about my legal appointment. Her performance had been for nothing, but the damage was done. The town believed I'd driven her to a breakdown. I pulled into a gas station to process this information. Inside, the clerk refused to serve me, pointing to a handwritten sign. We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone who threatens community safety. Zoe's campaign had turned me into a complete pariah. My phone battery was dying again. No library, no coffee shops, no public spaces would welcome me. I sat in my car, watching the gauge drop toward empty, feeling the walls close in. But something had shifted in me. The voice exercises had broken more than just physical silence. I drove to our family home, the half-burnt shell I'd been avoiding. If Zoe wanted a confrontation, she'd get one, but on my terms. I parked directly in front, in full view of her security cameras. Let her record this. I had nothing left to lose. The front door was locked, but I still had my key to the garage. Inside, I found what I was looking for. Our old family videos. Boxes of tapes from before Zoe's condition began. Evidence of her normal childhood, her loud laughter, her screaming tantrums. Proof that her sensitivity was selective and recent. I loaded the boxes into my car as Zoe appeared at the window. She was already on the phone, probably calling police. I didn't hurry. Let them come. Theodore would love the footage of me retrieving my own belongings from my own family home. As I drove away, I saw Dad's car approaching from the opposite direction. Our eyes met briefly. His face looked haggard, aged by the conflict tearing our family apart. For a moment, I thought he might stop, but he continued past, choosing the easier path as always. The factory parking lot had become my base of operations. I spread the videos across my back seat, organizing them by date. Each tape was a weapon against Zoe's mythology. Birthday parties where she shrieked with joy. Christmas mornings filled with her excited chatter. Years of normal volume before her sudden sensitivity. My phone rang. Marshal Stewart. His voice was carefully neutral as he informed me that Zoe had filed additional charges. Theft, this time, for taking the family videos. But he'd reviewed security footage from the library incident. The timestamp confirmed I couldn't have been there. He was beginning to see the pattern. He suggested I bring the videos to the station immediately. They could be logged as evidence before Zoe claimed I'd doctored them. I agreed, grateful for an official who still dealt in facts rather than hysteria. The truth was slowly emerging from beneath Zoe's carefully constructed lies. At the station, Rodriguez watched several videos with growing amazement. Teenage Zoe hosting loud sleepovers. The timing of Zoe's library collapse while our narrator was getting legal help is like scheduling a surprise party when the guest of honor is out of town. All that dramatic fainting for nothing. What a waste of good theatrics. Zoe singing karaoke at full volume. Zoe screaming at a concert just months before her diagnosis. The contrast with her current persona was undeniable. He made official copies, noting the chain of custody. Then he shared news that changed everything. The state fire inspector had reviewed the case. The specific pattern of wax residue indicated the candle had been deliberately tipped. Someone had pushed it over, ensuring it would catch the curtains. The investigation was now focused on who had access and motive. Zoe's behavior post-fire had raised red flags. Her immediate accusations, prepared documentation, and escalating campaign suggested consciousness of guilt. Rodriguez couldn't make promises, but the tide was turning. I left the station feeling lighter despite my exhaustion. In my car, I practiced speaking again. My voice was stronger now, sustained by righteous anger. I recorded myself on my phone, describing events in case I lost my voice again. Evidence of my truth, in my own words. The factory lot felt less like exile now, and more like a strategic position. I had lawyers, investigators, and growing evidence on my side. Zoe had overplayed her hand, hammered on years of successful manipulation. Her empire of lies was cracking. That night, I slept deeply for the first time since the fire. No dreams of smoke or whispers, just peaceful darkness, and the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new battles. I was finally equipped to fight. The girl who'd stolen my voice had awakened something stronger. Morning arrived with unexpected visitors. Mom and Dad's car pulled into the factory lot. They sat for several minutes before Dad finally emerged. He approached slowly, hands visible like he was afraid I might run or attack. Zoe's poison had infected even this moment. He handed me an envelope without speaking. Inside, a check for $5,000 and a note in Mom's handwriting for a fresh start somewhere else. They wanted me gone. Easier to exile one daughter than confront the other's lies. I felt the paper crumple in my fist. Dad saw my face and stepped back, but I didn't scream or rage. Instead, I spoke in my new, rough voice. Watch the videos, all of them, then decide who you're really protecting. He flinched at the sound, so different from my old voice, scarred by years of whispering and weeks of silence. He returned to the car without taking the check back. They drove away, leaving me with their conscience money and the bitter taste of abandonment. But I wouldn't run. Zoe had taken enough from me. She wouldn't take my home too. I cashed the check immediately, knowing they might stop payment once they realized I wasn't leaving. The money would fund my fight, gas, food, and whatever else I needed to see this through. Their guilt had given me resources just when Zoe thought she'd strip them all away. Theodore called with updates. He'd filed motions to preserve evidence and prevent Zoe from accessing my remaining accounts. accounts. The civil case was building strength. He'd also connected with Dr. Webb about my voice recovery, documenting the medical impact of years of forced whispering. But Zoe wasn't idle. That afternoon, flyers appeared with a new message: dangerous woman offering money for silence. She'd learned about the check and twisted it into evidence of my guilt. According to her narrative, I was trying to buy off witnesses to my crimes. Every gift became a weapon in her hands. I drove through town collecting the flyers, no longer caring who saw me. Let them stare. Let them whisper. Real whispers, not Zoe's enforced kind. My voice grew stronger with each hour of use. Speaking truth, even to empty air, was healing the damage she'd inflicted. At a red light, Mrs. Quinn appeared at my passenger window. She slipped inside quickly, glancing around nervously. Her words tumbled out in a rush. She'd been recording Zoe for weeks. Her security camera caught Zoe speaking normally when alone, laughing at full volume on phone calls, even singing in the backyard. She handed me a USB drive with shaking hands. She'd been too afraid to come forward earlier, but watching my exile had stirred her conscience. The evidence was time-stamped and clear. Zoe's performance only existed when she had an audience. Alone, she was perfectly normal. I hugged Mrs. Quinn, feeling tears on both our faces. One ally had become 2, then 3, now 4. The truth was building its own momentum. She promised to speak with investigators when needed, though she feared Zoe's retaliation. We all did. That evening, I sat in Theodore's office reviewing Mrs. Quinn's footage. The evidence was damning. Zoe hosting loud video calls with her online followers, coaching them on voice violence tactics, planning sessions where she strategized escalation, even practicing her collapse performances in the mirror. Theodore's expression grew grim as we watched. This went beyond false accusations. Zoe had built a movement around her lies, teaching others to weaponize fake conditions against their families. The scope was staggering. How many homes had she infected with enforced silence? We worked late into the night, building our case. Theodore suggested reaching out to Zoe's online followers, finding others who'd grown suspicious. If she'd taught them manipulation, some might have recognized it and pulled away. Their testimonies could establish a pattern of deliberate deception. But first, we needed to protect Mrs. Quinn. Theodore drafted a protective order, ensuring Zoe couldn't retaliate against our witness. The legal system moved slowly, but each filed document built a wall between truth and lies. Zoe's weapons were turning into shields for her victims. I slept in my car outside Theodore's office, feeling safer near legal protection than in familiar spaces. My dreams were changing. Instead of smoke and silence, I dreamed of speaking to crowds, telling our story, warning others about the subtle tyranny of manufactured illness. Dawn brought Marshal Stewart's call. The investigation had taken a decisive turn. They'd found the receipt for the specific candle that started the fire. Zoe had purchased it hours before the blaze, along with accelerant-adjacent materials. Combined with the tipped candle evidence, it painted a picture of premeditation. He couldn't arrest her yet. The evidence was circumstantial, but the arson charges against me were being dropped. The official letter would come within days. I was no longer a suspect, but a witness. The hunter had become the hunted, and Zoe didn't know it yet. I celebrated with breakfast at a truck stop outside town, where no one knew my face. The coffee tasted like freedom. My voice, though still rough, carried across the counter as I ordered. The waitress smiled at my enthusiasm over scrambled eggs. Simple pleasures felt revolutionary. My phone buzzed with messages from unknown numbers. Word was spreading through Zoe's online network. Some followers had questions, doubts, suspicions. They'd noticed inconsistencies in her stories, impossible timelines, contradictory claims. The faithful were wavering. One message stood out. A young woman named Theo had followed Zoe's teachings to establish whisper rules in her own home, but watching Zoe's escalation against me had opened her eyes. She'd realized the manipulation, the control, the destruction of normal family life. She wanted to help expose the truth. We arranged to meet at a diner 2 hours away. Theo arrived looking haunted, carrying folders of printed conversations from Zoe's private forums. The content was disturbing. Detailed instructions on faking symptoms, gaslighting family members, and destroying anyone who challenged the narrative. Theo had screenshots of Zoe bragging about her plans for me. Written weeks before the fire, Zoe had told her inner circle that she needed a dramatic event to solidify her victim status. She'd discussed various scenarios, weighing their impact. Fire had won for its visual drama and lasting damage. The evidence was overwhelming. Premeditation, conspiracy, attempted murder disguised as accident. Theo agreed to provide everything to investigators, though she feared the community's backlash. Zoe had created a cult of victimhood, and apostates faced vicious retaliation. I spent the drive back practicing my fully returned voice, singing along to the radio. Months of silence had ended. The songs felt like prayers of gratitude. Every note proved Zoe's failure. She'd tried to steal my voice forever, but only managed to make it stronger. Theodore's office had become war room and sanctuary combined. We organized evidence, planned strategy, prepared for Zoe's next move. She'd learn about the dropped charges soon. Her reaction would be swift and vicious. We had to be ready. The call came that evening. Dad's voice shook as he described Zoe's response to the news. She'd destroyed her room, screaming about injustice and conspiracy. Then she'd gone silent, locking herself away with her computer. The calm after her storm felt more ominous than the rage. I wanted to feel sympathy for my parents, but their enablement had nearly killed us all. They'd chosen comfortable lies over difficult truth for so long that reality itself had become their enemy. Now they were trapped with the monster they'd helped create. That night, the factory lot felt too exposed. I drove to Theodore's house, accepting his offer of a guest room. For the first time in weeks, I slept in a real bed, doors locked against more than just weather. Safety felt foreign, but welcome. Morning brought the storm we'd expected. Zoe had posted a manifesto online, claiming a vast conspiracy against voice violence victims. She named me, Theodore, Dr. Reeves, and Mrs. Quinn as perpetrators of systematic abuse. Her followers mobilized, flooding our phones and emails with threats. But something had shifted in the digital tide. For every rabid supporter, 2 skeptics emerged. Theo had shared our evidence in counter forums, and the truth was spreading like antibodies through Zoe's infected network. Mrs. Quinn keeping security footage of Zoe for weeks makes me wonder what first made her suspicious enough to start recording. There's something something calculated about quietly gathering evidence while maintaining the appearance of being fooled that feels deeper than simple neighborly concern. The cult was fracturing from within. Theodore filed immediate restraining orders while Marshal Stewart investigated the threats. The legal system groaned into motion, slow but inexorable. Each form filed, each statement given, each piece of evidence submitted built our fortress of truth against Zoe's assault. Dr. Reeves called with unexpected news. 3 of her colleagues had encountered similar cases, families destroyed by fabricated conditions, always with one manipulative member at the center. They were preparing a joint paper on induced illness behavior. Zoe would become a case study in psychological manipulation. The academic attention terrified Zoe more than legal consequences. Her entire identity depended on being seen as a victim, not a perpetrator. The prospect of professional analysis, of being diagnosed herself, sent her into panicked action. She appeared at Theodore's office with our parents, demanding a mediation session. Theodore refused to see her without law enforcement present. She erupted in the waiting room, her performance reaching new heights, but the receptionist simply called security, unmoved by theatrical collapses. I watched from Theodore's office window as security escorted her out. Mom and Dad followed, looking broken. They'd lived so long in Zoe's manufactured reality that actual reality felt like assault. Their daughter was a stranger, and they couldn't admit which one. That afternoon, we received word that Zoe had been hospitalized for exhaustion. The admission was voluntary, but the timing was strategic. Hospital stays generated sympathy and complicated legal proceedings. Even facing exposure, she was crafting new narratives of victimhood. But the investigation continued regardless. Marshal Stewart had connected with law enforcement in neighboring towns. Similar complaints had surfaced. Families reporting extortion through fake medical conditions, always traced back to Zoe's online communities. The pattern was too consistent to ignore. Theodore suggested a press conference, not to attack Zoe, but to warn other families. The story had implications beyond our personal drama. How many homes operated under enforced whisper rules? How many siblings had been exiled for refusing to comply? The public deserved to know. I hesitated. Going public meant reliving trauma, facing scrutiny, inviting judgment, but silence had nearly killed me once. I wouldn't let fear steal my voice again. We scheduled the conference for the following week, giving time to prepare and protect witnesses. The hospital called that evening. Zoe had listed me as her emergency contact, despite everything. The nurse sounded confused as she explained that Zoe was asking for me, claiming she wanted to reconcile. It was obviously a trap, but curiosity pulled at me. Theodore advised against going, but I needed to see her, to understand what drove someone to such elaborate cruelty. With Marshal Stewart as escort and Theodore on standby, I entered the hospital. The building smelled of disinfectant and despair. Zoe's room was private, paid for by our parents' guilt. She lay in bed, looking smaller than I remembered. Without her props, the meter, the headphones, the signs, she seemed almost normal, almost human. Then she opened her eyes and smiled. The conversation was brief, conducted in normal voices that felt strange after years of whispering. She admitted nothing but implied everything. The fire had been necessary, she explained, to show the danger of voice violence. My sacrifice would help countless others understand the seriousness of her condition. She genuinely believed her own mythology. The lies had become truth in her mind, justified by the greater good of her cause. She wasn't apologizing, she was recruiting. Even facing destruction, she thought she could convert me to her crusade. I left without giving her the satisfaction of anger or tears. In the hallway, Marshal Stewart shook his head. He'd seen enough. The investigation would continue. Charges would likely follow, but Zoe would always believe herself the hero of her story. The next days blurred together in preparation. Theodore coached me on public speaking while Dr. Reeves helped craft our message. We weren't just exposing Zoe, we were revealing a pattern of manipulation that destroyed families under the guise of accommodation. Former followers reached out daily now. Stories poured in of homes where children ruled through fake conditions, where parents lived in fear of triggering manufactured symptoms. Zoe hadn't invented the tactic, but she'd perfected and propagated it. Her digital legacy was a generation of tiny tyrants. The night before the press conference, I couldn't sleep. In Theodore's guest room, I practiced my statement until the words felt carved into my throat. Tomorrow, I would speak not in whispers, but in clarion tones. The truth would ring out after years of enforced silence. Mom called as dawn broke. Her voice sounded different, clearer, more present. She'd watched the videos finally, all of them. The evidence had broken through years of denial. She wanted to support me at the conference, to admit their failure, to choose truth over comfortable lies. I told her it was too late for easy redemption, but if she truly wanted to help, she could speak to other parents trapped in similar situations, share how manipulation had warped their judgment, help others recognize the signs before reaching our point of destruction. The conference room filled with reporters, investigators, and families who'd recognized their own stories in leaked details. I stood at the podium, throat tight with emotion but voice steady. The microphone felt like vindication. I began with the night of the fire, working backward through years of whispered tyranny. The room hung on every word as I detailed the slow erosion of normal life, the gradual acceptance of insanity, how love became leverage and accommodation became imprisonment. Dr. Reeves followed with clinical analysis. Theodore presented legal frameworks. Theo spoke about her journey from follower to whistleblower. Each voice added weight to our collective truth. The whisper rules were breaking down, replaced by honest volume. Questions came rapidly. How had it gone so far? Why hadn't anyone intervened? Where was Zoe now? We answered carefully, balancing exposure with legal constraints. The story would continue unfolding, but today was about prevention, not punishment. As the conference ended, I noticed movement at the back of the room. Zoe stood in the doorway, no longer in hospital clothes. She watched with an expression I'd never seen before, genuine surprise. She'd never imagined her victims would find voices louder than her lies. Security moved toward her, but she left voluntarily. No dramatic collapse, no performance, just a quiet retreat from a battle she'd already lost. The war might continue, but this field was ours. Truth had won its first victory. Outside, supporters and skeptics mingled. Families shared stories, exchanged contacts, formed networks of their own, not for manipulation, but for mutual mutual support. The healing would take time, but it had begun. Voices raised in normal volume felt like hymns of freedom. That night, I returned to Theodore's guest room for the last time. Tomorrow, I'd start apartment hunting, rebuilding a life outside of crisis. The insurance money from the fire damage would help, along with potential settlements from civil suits. Zoe's campaign had cost me everything but given me something precious, unshakable truth. My phone rang with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, tired of threats and harassment, but something made me pick up. A young voice, nervous but determined, asked if I was the woman from the news. Her sister was making her whole family crawl because walking vibrations hurt her spine. I gave her Theodore's number and Dr. Reeves' contact, told her she wasn't crazy, wasn't cruel for doubting, that love didn't mean accepting lies, and family didn't require self-destruction, that her voice mattered, at any volume she chose to use it. After hanging up, I sat in the darkness, feeling the weight and wonder of survival. Zoe had tried to silence me forever, but instead had created an advocate. Every family saved from whisper rules would be testimony to truth's ultimate power over manipulation. The factory lot looked different when I drove past the next morning. No longer exile territory, but the place where I'd found my voice in solitude, where I'd chosen fight over flight, where Zoe's victim had transformed into her opposition. I had one last stop before moving forward. The half-burnt house still stood, yellow tape fading in the sun. Inside, workers had begun renovation. The fire damage would be repaired, the structure restored, but the whisper signs were gone, thrown away with other debris. Dad stood in what used to be the living room, directing contractors. He saw me and paused, searching for words at normal volume. We talked briefly about insurance, repairs, practical matters. Neither mentioned Zoe, hospitalized again after the press conference. As I left, he called out in a voice still learning its natural level. He was proud of me, of my courage, of my refusal to let lies become law. The words felt strange between us, but honest. Maybe some bridges could be rebuilt alongside houses. The apartment I'd found was small but bright, with windows that opened wide and no rules about sound. I unpacked my few belongings, including the USB drives of evidence and a new journal for writing without fear. The blank pages promised stories told in truth. That evening, Theodore called with updates. The investigation was expanding. Zoe faced potential charges for false reporting, fraud, and reckless endangerment. Her online empire was crumbling as platforms banned communities promoting fake medical conditions for manipulation. But more importantly, families were healing. Parents were reclaiming authority. Zoe listing her sister as emergency contact after trying to burn her house down has to be the boldest move since someone invented the reply all button. Siblings were reuniting. Homes were filling with normal sounds of life. The whisper rules were ending, one household at a time. Our story had given others permission to speak. I made dinner in my new kitchen, humming while I cooked. The sound echoed off walls that had never known enforced silence. My voice was different now, scarred but strong, rough but real. Zoe had changed it forever, but not how she'd intended. As night fell, I thought about the long journey from that first whispered warning about fire to this moment of vocal freedom. The path had nearly killed me, but survival had forged something unbreakable. A voice that would never again be silenced by manipulation or fear. My phone buzzed with another message from a family seeking help. Tomorrow, I'd connect them with resources, share our story, offer hope. Tonight, I simply savored the sound of my own breathing, unmonitored and unashamed. The volume of victory was exactly as loud as it needed to be. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Dad's truck sat outside my apartment building. He stood by the passenger door, holding a cardboard box. I approached cautiously, noting his tired posture and the way he kept glancing around as if Zoe might materialize from thin air. He handed me the box without explanation. Inside were more family videos, ones I'd missed during my hurried search. These dated back even further. Zoe as a toddler, screaming gleefully on playground swings, shouting nursery rhymes at maximum volume, evidence that predated any possible claim of sensitivity by over a decade. Dad pointed to a specific tape labeled Zoe's 8th birthday. His gesture suggested I watch it immediately. Then he returned to his truck and drove away, leaving me with questions and growing curiosity about what that particular video might contain. Back in my apartment, I loaded the tape into an old VCR I'd bought from a thrift store. The footage showed Zoe's princess-themed party, complete with a hired entertainer who led the children in loud singing games. But what caught my attention happened in the background. Mom filming while Zoe whispered instructions to her friends about pretending to cry when the music played. Even at 8, she'd been orchestrating performances. The other children looked confused but complied, creating a bizarre scene of mass weeping during Happy Birthday. Mom's voice on the recording expressed concern, but Zoe quickly switched to delighted laughter when she got the reaction she wanted. I made digital copies immediately, adding them to my growing archive. Theodore needed to see this pattern of manipulation stretching back decades. But first, I had another visitor to handle. Mrs. Quinn stood at my door, looking frantic. She thrust a manila envelope into my hands. Inside were printed emails between Zoe and someone named Patricia Kellerman. The messages detailed plans to expand the Whisper movement into a formal organization, complete with membership fees and certification programs for voice violence counselors. The scope of Zoe's ambitions stunned me. She'd been planning to monetize her manipulation on a massive scale, turning family dysfunction into a business model. Mrs. Quinn had intercepted the emails when they'd been mistakenly delivered to her address. Zoe had used a fake mailing address one digit off from Mrs. Quinn's. I spent the afternoon organizing this new evidence with Theodore. He immediately recognized the legal implications: fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and potential racketeering charges if Zoe had actually launched her scheme. The investigation was expanding beyond our family drama into criminal enterprise territory. Marshal Stewart called with his own update. The state fire inspector's final report was complete. Beyond confirming the deliberately tipped candle, they'd found something else: accelerant residue on the curtains. Not enough to prove arson definitively, but enough to show someone had prepared for a more dramatic fire than what actually occurred. Rodriguez asked me to come to the station. He had security footage from the night of the fire that he wanted me to review. The prospect of seeing that night again made my stomach clench, but I agreed. Truth required facing even the worst moments. At the station, Rodriguez led led me to a small viewing room. The footage came from a traffic camera that partially captured our street. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m., about 2 hours before I'd smelled smoke. A figure matching Zoe's build could be seen entering the house through the front door. The next clip jumped to 1:58 a.m. The same figure exited, walked to the end of the driveway, then returned to the house. Rodriguez explained this matched the timeline of when the candle would have been tipped. She'd left, ensuring she had an alibi, then returned to create the crisis. But the most damning evidence came from Zoe herself. Rodriguez showed me her original statement to police, then a second statement given a week later. The details had changed significantly. Times, locations, even the color of her pajamas. She'd been refining her story, not realizing her earlier version was already on record. I left the station with copies of everything, my mind racing with implications. Zoe had planned the fire, prepared for it, executed it, then tried to frame me for it. The girl who claimed whispers were violence had committed actual violence against her own family. That evening, Theodore called an emergency meeting. He'd been contacted by Patricia Kellerman, the woman from Zoe's emails. She was real, and she was terrified. She'd believed in Zoe's condition initially, even investing money in the planned organization. But irregularities in Zoe's stories had made her suspicious. Patricia had hired a private investigator before cutting ties with Zoe. The investigator's report revealed Zoe's extensive history of manipulation, including 3 previous families she'd befriended and convinced to adopt whisper rules. Each family had eventually expelled her when her demands became too extreme. We met Patricia at Theodore's office. She brought banker's boxes full of documentation, contracts Zoe had drawn up, promotional materials for the fake organization, even architectural plans for a silent healing center that would have cost millions to build. The depth of Zoe's delusions became clear. She genuinely believed she could build an empire on enforced silence, turning her manufactured condition into a movement that would sweep the nation. The fire had been meant to launch her into the spotlight as the ultimate victim. Patricia agreed to testify if needed. She'd lost $30,000 to Zoe's schemes, money she'd borrowed against her retirement. Her story added financial fraud to Zoe's growing list of potential charges. The girl who'd made us whisper had been planning to make thousands pay for the privilege. As we organized evidence late into the night, my phone rang. Mom's number, but Dad's voice. He spoke carefully, formally, as if reading from notes. Zoe had checked herself out of the hospital and disappeared. She'd taken Mom's car and cleaned out their emergency cash fund. Security footage from their bank showed Zoe withdrawing the maximum ATM limit while wearing a surgical mask and sunglasses. She'd left a note claiming she was seeking treatment at a specialized facility, but the number she'd provided was disconnected. Theodore immediately contacted Rodriguez. A missing person report would complicate the investigation, but Zoe's flight suggested consciousness of guilt. Road alerts were issued for Mom's car. The net was closing, and Zoe knew it. I couldn't sleep that night, wondering where Zoe had gone. Theodore insisted I stay at his house for safety. A cornered manipulator was unpredictable, but part of me hoped she'd simply disappear, start fresh somewhere else. Prison wouldn't cure what was wrong with her. Morning brought chaos. Zoe hadn't fled. She'd doubled down. A new website had appeared overnight. The Silenced Truth. My sister tried to kill me. The site featured edited versions of our family videos, security footage from public cameras, and a donation button for her recovery fund. The narrative she'd constructed was masterful in its distortion. Every piece of evidence against her had been reframed as proof of persecution. The fire became my attempt to silence her permanently. Her flight from the hospital became escape from family violence. The investigation became systematic oppression. Theodore worked frantically to get the site taken down, while I watched donations pour in from strangers moved by Zoe's fabricated plight. She'd found a new audience, one that didn't know our history. The internet's appetite for victim narratives was feeding her delusions, but Zoe had made a crucial mistake. The website's domain registration used Mom's credit card, fraud across state lines. The donation processing went through an account she'd opened using Patricia's stolen identity. Federal crimes were piling up faster than she could invent explanations. Rodriguez arrived at Theodore's house with news. They'd tracked Mom's car to a motel 2 towns over. Local police were maintaining surveillance while warrants were prepared. The game was nearly over, but Zoe still had moves to make. That afternoon, she made them. A live stream appeared on her website. Zoe in the motel room, surrounded by her familiar props. She spoke in whispers to the camera, claiming she was broadcasting her final message before her family silenced her forever. The performance was compelling. She produced documents, some real, some fabricated, painting herself as a lifelong victim of family abuse. She showed burn scars on her arm, claiming I'd injured her during previous confrontations. The scars looked fresh, self-inflicted. Thousands watched as she escalated her narrative. She claimed our parents had paid doctors to misdiagnose her, that I'd stalked her for years, jealous of her sensitivity. Patricia losing $30,000 to Zoe's fake healing center plans makes me question how many other investors might be out there right now. The motel livestream with fresh scars seems like Zoe's creating evidence in real time while thousands watch her perform. That the fire had been my third attempt on her life. Each lie built on the previous one, creating an alternate reality that existed only in her mind. Theodore contacted the platform, but takedown requests took time. Meanwhile, Zoe's audience grew. Comments poured in offering support, money, even shelter. She'd found her tribe, people who wanted to believe in persecution narratives more than they wanted truth. The stream continued for hours. Zoe demonstrated her symptoms, collapsing dramatically when a siren passed outside. She showed her decibel meter readings, claiming the motel's air conditioner was causing nerve damage. She presented her laminated volume charts as evidence of medical necessity, but fatigue was setting in. Her performance became repetitive, desperate. She started contradicting earlier claims, mixing up dates and details. The comments section began to shift as viewers noticed inconsistencies. Questions replaced sympathy. Doubt crept in. Rodriguez texted updates. The warrants were ready. Officers were in position. They were waiting for the stream to end, not wanting to create a spectacle that Zoe could leverage, but she seemed prepared to broadcast indefinitely, sustained by attention and delusion. Then Mom appeared in the stream's background. She'd driven Dad's truck to the motel, slipping past police who were watching for her car. She approached Zoe slowly, hands visible, face calm. The confrontation we'd all avoided was finally happening. Zoe's reaction was immediate and theatrical. She fell to the floor, claiming Mom's presence was causing seizures, but Mom simply sat on the motel bed, waiting. The camera kept rolling as Zoe writhed and gasped, her performance reaching new extremes. Minutes passed. Mom remained still. Zoe's convulsions slowed, then stopped. She lay on the floor, breathing heavily, realizing her ultimate weapon, medical manipulation, had no effect on the woman who'd enabled it for so long. The stream's chat exploded with confusion. Viewers debated whether they were witnessing abuse or exposure. Some called for police intervention. Others questioned why Zoe had recovered so quickly from her seizure. The narrative was fracturing in real time. Mom reached for something in her purse. Zoe flinched, but Mom simply produced a folder. She laid out documents on the bed. Zoe's real medical records showing perfect health. Test results from multiple specialists. Even brain scans proving no neurological abnormalities. Zoe scrambled for the camera, trying to end the stream, but Mom was faster, holding the documents up for viewers to see. The chat scrolled too fast to read as thousands processed the revelation. The victim narrative was collapsing under the weight of evidence. Police entered moments later. The stream cut off as officers secured the scene. I watched the blank screen, feeling a complex mix of relief and sadness. Zoe's grand performance had ended not with sympathy, but with exposure. She'd orchestrated her own downfall. Theodore fielded calls from reporters who'd been monitoring the stream. We declined all interviews, maintaining focus on the legal process ahead. The story would be public record soon enough. We didn't need to feed the media circus Zoe had tried to create. Rodriguez called with confirmation. Zoe was in custody, charged with multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and filing false reports. Mom had provided a statement supporting the charges. The woman who'd enabled Zoe for years had finally chosen truth over comfortable lies. Dad arrived at Theodore's house that evening. He looked older, but somehow lighter, as if a weight had lifted. He handed me another box, this one containing Zoe's journals from her teenage years. He'd found them hidden in the attic, wrapped in plastic as if she'd been preserving evidence. The journals revealed the evolution of Zoe's manipulation, detailed plans for controlling family dynamics, research on various conditions she'd considered claiming, practice scripts for different scenarios, even a timeline for escalation that matched our lived experience perfectly. One entry stood out. They love me too much to question the performance. That love is my power. I can make them do anything if I threaten to suffer. Written at age 16, it showed clear awareness of her manipulation. She'd never been deluded, just committed to the lie. Theodore added the journals to our evidence collection. They would prove crucial in establishing premeditation and pattern behavior. Zoe had documented her own crimes, confident she'd never be challenged. Her arrogance had preserved the very proof that would convict her. The next days passed in a blur of legal procedures. Zoe was denied bail after prosecutors demonstrated flight risk. Her public defender tried to argue mental illness, but the journals undermined any claim of delusion. She'd known exactly what she was doing. Mom and Dad began attending family therapy, real therapy with licensed professionals. They needed to understand how they'd enabled Zoe's behavior for so long. Their guilt was profound, but they were committed to healing. The family that had whispered in fear was learning to speak truth. I returned to my apartment, ready to rebuild my life. The insurance settlement came through, covering my losses from the fire. I enrolled in community college, planning to study psychology. Understanding manipulation had become more than personal interest. It felt like a calling. Theodore helped me establish a support network for families dealing with fabricated illness manipulation. Not a formal organization like Zoe had planned, but a simple online forum where people could share experiences and resources. Within days, dozens of families joined, recognizing their own stories and ours. Mrs. Quinn became an unexpected ally in this work. She'd started recording other neighbors who'd witnessed Zoe's public performances over the years. Their testimonies painted a picture of escalating manipulation that the whole community had been too polite to challenge. The preliminary hearing arrived faster than expected. I sat in the courthouse waiting room, practicing my breathing exercises. My voice was strong now, ready to speak truth in official record. The girl who'd been forced to whisper would testify at full volume. Zoe entered in restraints, looking smaller than I remembered. The orange jumpsuit hung loose on her frame. She'd lost weight, unable to maintain her performance without an audience. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for sympathetic faces that weren't there. The prosecutor presented the evidence methodically. Financial records showing fraud, medical documents proving deception, the journals demonstrating premeditation, security footage of the fire preparation. Each piece built an undeniable case against her. When my turn came to testify, I spoke clearly about years of manipulation. The whisper rules, the enforced silence, the gradual erosion of normal family life. I described the night of the fire, how conditioning had nearly killed us all. My voice never wavered. Zoe watched me with an expression I'd never seen before, genuine surprise that I could speak so strongly. She'd believed her own lie about my weakness, forgetting that she'd created the very conditions that had forged my strength. The judge bound the case over for trial. Zoe would face justice for her crimes. As court officers led her away, she turned back once. Her mouth moved in what might have been words, but no sound emerged. The girl who'd weaponized whispers had lost her voice to truth. Outside the courthouse, our family gathered. Mom and Dad stood together, but apart from me, respecting the boundaries I'd established. We weren't ready for reconciliation yet, but we were moving toward it. Healing would take time, but it had begun. Theodore congratulated me on my testimony. He'd taken the case pro bono, believing in the importance of exposing manipulation tactics. Other lawyers had reached out, wanting to learn from our experience. Zoe's case was becoming a cautionary tale in legal circles. I drove home alone, windows down, radio playing at normal volume. The city sounds that had once felt forbidden now seemed like freedom. Every honk, shout, and siren reminded me that I'd reclaimed my right to exist at full volume. That evening, I hosted a small gathering in my apartment. Mrs. Quinn, Theodore, Dr. Reeves, and a few others who'd supported my fight for truth. We talked and laughed at normal volume, celebrating the simple joy of unrestricted conversation. As the night wound down, I stood on my small balcony, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, other families were trapped in silence, controlled by manufactured conditions and emotional manipulation. But our story was spreading, giving them permission to question, to doubt, to speak. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Another family seeking help, another home where someone had weaponized fake illness for control. I saved the number, planning to call them tomorrow. Tonight was for rest and reflection. The journey from whispered victim to vocal advocate had nearly killed me, but survival had transformed me into something Zoe never anticipated, a voice for others trapped in manufactured silence. Her greatest weapon had become my greatest strength. I thought about Zoe in her cell, surrounded by voices she couldn't control or silence. The irony was perfect. She'd spent years making us whisper, and now she was trapped in a place where volume was constant and uncontrolled. Her sensitivity would be tested by reality. The next morning brought final tasks. I packed up the evidence files, preparing to return them to Theodore's office. The investigation was complete, the truth documented and preserved, but I kept copies of certain items, reminders of how far manipulation could go when enabled by love and fear. At the bank, I closed the account my parents had set up for my exile. Patricia showing up with her purse like she's about to pull out hard candy, but instead whips out medical records is peak mom energy. Nothing says, "I'm done with your nonsense," quite like bringing receipts to your daughter's live stream meltdown. The money would go toward my education instead. The teller recognized me from the news coverage of the hearing, offering a sympathetic smile. I was becoming known not as a victim, but as a survivor. The apartment felt different now, less like a refuge and more like a home. I hung pictures on the walls, including one family photo from before Zoe's performance began. We looked happy, normal, unaware of the storm approaching. But even storms could pass. My voice had returned fully, carrying strength born from struggle. When I spoke now, people listened not because they had to, but because truth resonated in every word. The whisper rules were broken forever, replaced by the power of honest volume. That night, I sat at my desk and began writing our story in detail. Not for publication or profit, but for the families who would need it. A roadmap for recognizing manipulation, resisting control, and reclaiming voice. Zoe had tried to build an empire on silence. Instead, she'd created a foundation for truth. The work would continue. More families would reach out. More stories would emerge. More voices would rise from enforced whispers to empowered speech. The girl who'd made us all whisper had unknowingly launched a movement, just not the one she'd intended. Thanks for coming along for the ride. Definitely been a trip digging into all these questions together. Until we cross paths again, subscribe for more content like this.